Either way, my friends, welcome. A very friendly welcome to Daily Power Parsha. This is our daily look at the Torah reading. So this week we have a super duper special Torah portion, which is called Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha is God's call to Abraham to move, to pack up, leave his house, his father, leave his land, his father's house, his birthplace, and go to sights unseen, to places uncharted, to destinations unyet disclosed. And Abraham follows faithfully God's call. This is one of the major tests of Abraham. Will he follow God into the unknown? And he demonstrates his willingness to follow. One thing that I want to mention, which I did not mention yesterday, the words Lech Lecha are very strange. God says to Abram in the beginning of the Parsha, the Torah portion, Lech Lecha me'artzecha, Lech Lecha, go. Lech means go, Lecha means to you. So if we want to translate it literally means go to you from your land, which doesn't make any sense. It should just say go from your land, like leave your land. What's this go to you? The whole phraseology God was telling Abram, God was telling Abram, leaving your true self.
You're breaking up. Really You're breaking up a bit, Rabbi.
Hold on, can you hear me now? Am I back?
Yes, you were in and out a little bit.
Perfect. I'm always in and out a little bit. I'm just saying. Even in real life. Kidding. So Lech Lecha means that as you go on your journey, you will discover who you truly are. And I mentioned this yesterday, but I didn't connect it with the words Lech Lecha. Lech, again, so you know the words. Lech, it means go. Lecha means to you. What does go to you? Sometimes the journeys, as we explore and journey outward, we discover who we are inside. One of my favorite books when I was younger was called The Alchemist. You know, The Alchemist, that book? Pablo Coelho or something like that. I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. Anyway, it's a story about a guy who goes on a search for something magical and ultimately discovers the treasure inside. It's like the famous story about the guy who had a dream about a treasure under a bridge in the big city. And he goes to the bridge in the big city and he starts digging. And the guard says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm digging for a treasure." He says, "Why?" "Because I had a dream." He's like, "You had a dream." "I had a dream that under Moshe, the shoemaker's house, there was a treasure in such and such city." And he realized, that's my house. I'm Moshe, the shoemaker. Like, oh my gosh. So he goes home and he digs under his own house and he finds a treasure. Sometimes we need to go somewhere else to discover what we've had all along. Now, you could say that's unfortunate, and I might agree with that. Like, we should, if only we realize the treasures that we already had without needing to drive ourselves crazy, but such is the process. So God tells Abram, Lech Lecha. It's only by journeying forth. It's only by leaving your comforts, your comfort zones, and what is comfortable, that you'll truly and honestly discover who you really are. And I think this is a message for us in life, right? It's when we challenge ourselves. It's when we take on things that we might be apprehensive of, that we truly grow. And not that we become someone else, but we truly uncover the depths of the strength that we had inside. If we always stay comfortable, we're not going to grow. I once heard Rabbi Dr. Torsky, of blessed memory, share the following. He said, how is it? What example did he use? He used a crab, I think. Crab? A turtle? A lobster? Maybe a lobster. I don't know. Some creature. I have to look back and try to see if I can find it. So this creature, whichever one it is, grows, or what happens, they grow big and they have a crusty exterior shell, and they push against that shell and it becomes uncomfortable. And because it becomes uncomfortable, it breaks open, and then there's no shell, and then it grows a new shell, but in a larger space, a larger capacity that it can grow into again. So the process of growth happens by feeling uncomfortable and then breaking out of that discomfort. So he was joking. He was talking about like how we try to numb our pain or discomfort. Like what we do as human beings nowadays is we mask our discomfort. Like I'm not feeling so well. So let me take something. Let me try to make it feel better, as opposed to feeling the pain and growing because of the pain. Anyway, that was his approach as a psychiatrist. That was his takeaway. But my takeaway is sometimes when we challenge ourselves, that's when we grow. We have to push against those hard surfaces, push against the contours of our personality, of our comfort zones, of our experiences. We push against that we can have a true breakthrough, not to discover that we're someone else, but to discover the depth of who we really are. Okay, so that's a bit of an opening into Lech Lecha. We read yesterday about, which was our first foray into the Torah portion, we read about how God tells Abram to go to this uncharted territory. He goes with his wife and his nephew Lot and his possessions and the people that had been inspired by him, and they go to the land of Canaan. The Canaanites were living there, although they had not been always there. They were there then, and there was a famine. So he goes to Egypt, and in Egypt, the whole deal was Sarah's abduction, Sarai's abduction, because her name had not been changed yet. Anyway, long story short, it all works out. Everyone's safe and happy and extremely wealthy. This takes us to the third reading. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we're going to jump right into the action. Okay. Third reading, again, Lech Lecha, go to yourself. Reading 3, Genesis chapter 13, verse number 5. And also Lot, who went with Abram, had flocks and cattle and tents. In other words, Lot, the nephew, due to his proximity to his uncle, who had been rewarded greatly, Lot also had he had amassed his own wealth, which came in the form of flocks and cattle. Remember, they didn't have cars then. So you couldn't have a Bentley, a Maserati, I'm going to mention now a Tesla. Maybe that's looking a little less pricey, but whatever. So he didn't have a flock of or a fleet of vehicles. He had flocks and cattle. That's what he had. That was an illustration of wealth. So Lot, the nephew, was also wealth. Let's continue verse 6. And the land did not bear them to dwell together. It was difficult for Abram and his nephew Lot to dwell together, for their possessions were many and they could not dwell together. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. Verse 7, and there was a quarrel between the herdsmen of Abram's cattle and between the herdsmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanites and Perizzites were then dwelling in the land. So what does that mean? There was a quarrel. The land wasn't big enough. There was a quarrel. The Canaanites and Perizzites were living there. What is the Torah really trying to say? It's like saying all these disjointed sentences, but what's really going on here? Here's the story as pieced together by the commentaries, the Midrash, the Talmud, etc. The story is like this. They each had a tremendous number of animals. And Lot would let his animals graze and eat of land, property, fields, and farms that were not his. Because he reasoned, look, God has promised this land to Abraham and his descendants, to my uncle and his family. I'm family. This is our land, or it will be our land eventually. So I'm taking a bit of a prepayment, right? It's my land anyway. So the animals are going to enjoy it. What's the big deal? Whereas Abram's shepherds, Abram told the shepherds, not at all. Don't do this, because this is not our land yet. You have to respect other people's property. No stealing, no theft, right? No letting the animals graze. So he would put a muzzle on the animals, or whatever they would put on the animals, to make sure they didn't eat of anyone else's food. So when they got to a field that was public, land that was the public use, didn't belong to anybody, or his own property, they ate there. When it wasn't their land, they didn't eat there. So there was a moral and ethical, ideological distinction and dispute between Abram and Lot, or between his herdsmen and the other guy's herdsmen, between their two shepherds. Because Abram said the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. In other words, even though we'll eventually get it, but who's living there now? The Canaanites and the Perizzites. And we can't steal. Lot said, no, it's going to be ours. So we're taking a prepayment. So it got to a breaking point. Do you know how disputes happen? Like it starts off with a little dispute and then eventually it gets big. And it gets so big that at some point you don't even remember why you're fighting in the first place. Yeah. Present company excluded. Obviously, we don't have such faribbles like that. We don't have such disputes, but it happens in life where people, the little thing happens, and before you know it, no one's talking to each other. It's a big blow up. It's a big blow up. What's it? It's about a little thing. It's about, a phone call. It's about herdsmen. Little things become big things. So this sounds like a silly dispute. The animals eat, they don't eat, whatever. So let your animals not eat. Why do you have to go to war with the other guy that has a different opinion? That's what happens sometimes. That's what happens. Sarah, do you have a question or yeah?
Yeah, is faribbles like a Yiddish word? You said faribbles?
Yeah, faribble is a Yiddish word that means sort of like a contentiousness, like a fight. Yeah. So it's like it blows up, it expands. The nature of dispute and conflict is it starts off really small. It's like a crack in your windshield, right? Yeah. One day you're driving, it's happened to me before. One day you're driving, you're like, I see like like when the sun shines, I see a little bit of reflection. I don't know how that happened. Maybe a truck or something or another car kicked up a pebble when someone was driving on the highway one day, and it creates a little nick in the glass. Well, the nature of glass is the moment it's compromised, from that moment on, it's only headed one direction. It's only going to become bigger. You got to take care of that before it becomes a real crack and a little, I forget what they call it, a little, not a crack. They call it
shatter.
No, before it shatters. It's a little, there may or may not be a word. I thought there was a word for it, but I can't remember it. Whatever, a little blemish in the thing can make a big crack. So a little blemish, a little fissure in a relationship can end up becoming a big deal. So Abram says to Lot the following, verse 8. And Abram said to Lot the following: look, let's time out, stop, let's stop the fight. Please let there be no quarrel between me and between you, and between my herdsmen and between your herdsmen. For we are kinsmen. We're family. We're mishpacha. I don't want to fight with you.
Oh.
I don't want you to fight with me.
Oh.
Let's not fight. Right? Let's not fight. It's not good. It's not good for us to fight. Abram says, is not all the land before you? In other words, there's so much land here. Why are we living on top of each other so that we're noticing each other's, idiosyncrasies and then getting upset about it? Let's create some distance. Let's just each go our own way. So Abram says to Lot, to his nephew, please part from me. If you go left, I will go right. If you go right, I will go left. I'll let you choose. You go wherever you want, and I'll make sure just to be a little bit away. Abram takes the mature approach. Let's not keep on fighting. This is not healthy. It's not productive. I don't want to do it. I hope you don't want to do it also. Let's create some boundaries. Let's create some space. If we're not constantly all over each other, so then we won't be fighting. Just create a little distance. It'll be healthy for the relationship. By the way, every relationship typically needs a little bit of distance. Respect, distance. It's a good thing.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Was there land for the taking?
Yeah. There was land. Yeah. I mean, it was under, general dominion in some places. Like it says, the Canaanites and Perizzites were dwelling in the land. So I'm sure they had some sort of government or I don't know if government was the right word, but some sort of, system. But there was plenty of land. There was plenty of land to go around. So verse 10, and Lot raised his eyes, and he saw the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was entirely watered. What that means is that it was irrigated. It was lush. It was very fertile. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, that talk about foreshadowing later events. Before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you come to Tzor. Basically, he saw a part of the land, he saw that plain that was really lush and really just very fertile land, beautiful land, like Gan Eden, like Kagan Hashem, like the garden of the Lord. It's like beautiful, like the land of Egypt. Land of Egypt, when you come to Tsar, that was a place in Egypt that was also very lush and beautiful. So this is what's going on. This is what Lot sees. He pulls out the map. Where should I move? Where should I go? He finds a place. And Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan. And Lot traveled from the east, and they parted from one another. Okay? So this is the moment where the two relatives, uncle and nephew, go their own separate ways. You have to understand, this is a big move. Lot, ever since his father died tragically at a young age, Lot, the nephew, had been with his uncle. His uncle was basically like his father figure. And here they were separating. It's a big deal. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, which would become the land of Israel. And Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and pitched his tents until Sodom. So he was in the vicinity of the city called Sodom, or in Hebrew, Sodom. And as the Torah once again foreshadows, the people of Sodom were very evil and sinful against the Lord. And yet, Lot chose that for himself. Okay, I want to rewind a little bit. It's a very rich narrative. There's a lot to talk about. So let me rewind for a moment and discuss some more details. Number one, on the surface, Abraham is telling Lot, let's separate. Let's leave each other. Right? You go your way, I go my way. This town ain't big enough for the both of us. We're not getting along. Let's just call it quits. Let's call this relationship quits on some level. Go right. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. Fine. The commentaries add a bit of a twist. And they say, well, it's not exactly that. What Abram was saying to his nephew is, no matter where you go, and you're going to go on your own because we are splitting, leaving each other. But wherever you go, I won't be too far. If you go left, I will go right, meaning I'll be at your right. I won't be right there, but I'll be adjacent. If you go right, I'll go left, which means I'll be nearby as well. So what Avram was hinting, or maybe he's even said it clearly to his nephew, was, look, we need to go our separate ways, but I'm never going to forget about you, and I'm never going to abandon you. And in a moment of crisis, in a moment of need, I will always be there with you. So, I kind of want to liken this to parenting. And so hear me out for a moment here. In parenting, there are different stages. There's a stage in which you keep the kid at home, right? And you give the kid all the rules, like you got to do this, you got to do that, right? And then there's a point in life when the child moves out and the child goes on their own because they're no longer a child. They're now a growing, a maturing human being. And in the process of maturity, you have to go your own way. You can't stay always under that, in that space. Yes, it's comfortable and protective. I mean, I guess that could be argued, depending on the child's perspective. It could be, dominating and domineering, but nonetheless, it's a nurturing environment. But from the perspective of the child, there needs to be that growth, and that growth happens through independence. Independence means that you go your own way on some level. But a healthy parent will communicate to a child that although you are now growing into an independent adult, you should know I will always be here for you in any way that you wish, in any way that I can. I'm here for you. Not in a controlling way or a domineering way. You have to do it my way. No, I trust you. I respect you. I love you. I'm always here for you. I'm giving you space. So on a very basic level, this is what Abram is telling Lot. He's telling his nephew. He's saying, you need your own space. You need to figure out your own life. I have my way, you have your own way, and that's, and if we recognize that we're not exactly the same way, so I can keep on fighting it, and in the process fight you. I can try to wring the behavior that I want to see out of you. I can try that, but it's not going to work. It's only going to create animosity. It's only going to create more friction. So you go your own way, but I'm not abandoning you. I'm not saying you go your own way. I don't care anymore. No, I love you. I'll be here for you. You go to the left, I'll be right there to the right. You go to the right, I'll be there to the left. I will always be nearby because I love you and I care about you. And I know that you need independence. And that's how it is. And that's how it is in life. Now, parents don't control children. Parents cannot dictate the way a child lives. A healthy parent, at least, cannot do that. You raise your kids to the best of your ability. You give them the tools they need to that you believe they need to navigate, and then ultimately they're going to make their own decisions and walk through life in their own way. And that's healthy. That's the way life works. Is that a problem? Is that a flaw? It's a feature. It's a feature. It's the way life works. Abram gets it. Lot is gonna get it. he's learning, and that's it. Make sense so far? Checking in on the story. Yes, make sense. Okay. Let's continue with the next communication. I'm sorry. Okay. And the last sentence that I still highlighted, verse 13. And the people of Sodom were very evil and sinful against the Lord. And that's where Lot chooses. He's expressing his independence, out from under the wing of his uncle, of his righteous uncle Abram. He's experimenting. He's experimenting. He's going to Sodom. He's going to the big city, Sin City. That's what's going on. He doesn't choose a docile place. He chooses the place where the people are very evil and sinful. Okay, he's going to have fun. He's going to enjoy life. Okay, that's his deal. Avram doesn't stop him. He knows that at a certain point, you got to let go. But even wherever you are, I'm with you. This is ideally how to deal with children, education, parenting, the whole gamut. Can't control someone. Love them, guide them, allow them to experience freedom. Let's continue verse 14. And the Lord said to Abram after Lot had parted from him, so God says, after Lot leaves, God says to Abram the following, please raise your eyes and see. From the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, Saphona, Venegba, Vakedma, Vayama, look all around, panoramic view, 360 degrees. God says to Abram, look all around, for all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your seed to eternity. I promise, God says, I will give you this entire land that you're seeing. And I will remember the covenant. The covenant is always two promises throughout the Bible, throughout the 5 books, throughout the Torah, 2 promises. Progeny, land. It's all about children and the land of Israel. Those are the 2 promises consistently. It's about more of the Jewish people and a space to call home. So God says, number 1, the land I am giving to you. And promise number 2, I will make your seed like the dust of the earth. So that if a man will be able to count the dust of the earth, so will your seed be counted. Just like you cannot, let me just say that in easier terms. Just like no human being could ever count the dust of the earth, right? Imagine you go to, the earth is dust, is dirt. You can count every grain of dirt, impossible. Go to the beach. How many grains of sand are there on the beach? More than 10, right? More than 100. It's a lot. So just like you cannot count the dust of the earth, so too you will not be able to count your seed, your children. The obvious question is, one second, there aren't that many Jews, right? Hold on, slow it down. They're countable. It's not like, an infinite number. Relative to the other nations, it's small. So one way to look at it is, no, it says progeny, your seed. That could include also Ishmael and Esau, which give rise to Islam and Christianity, the other religions that are coming from the other progeny of of Abram. So you could say that. So that includes the whole world, essentially. I mean, not everybody, but a big chunk is counted for. That's on one level. But even if we think Jewishly, you also have this idea. There's when you talk about something counting something, you can count quantitatively or qualitatively, right? So you can count with numbers, or you can count with quality. Why the dust of the earth? The earth is very special. The earth is something that everybody steps on, but it also supports life. You can't live without the earth. I mean, on every level, literally on every level. You can't live not on earth. I mean, the moon is not yet, and Mars is not yet a reality, but you can't live on the earth. But even beyond that, the earth produces vegetation, which gives, without the earth, life doesn't exist. So the same message here is God to Abram, without your progeny, life won't be able to exist the way I want it to exist, right? Without that message, without the morality, without the ethics, with the values of Judaism, life doesn't look the same. So it's an important message. It's an important message for us to recognize the importance of Torah, mitzvot, Judaism, etc. So this is what God tells Abram: I promise you the land, and I promise you progeny, children. So he says to Abram, rise, walk in the land, to the length and to its breadth, for I will give it to you. He says, walk the land, and almost with your footsteps, with every step that you take, you'll be, kind of metaphorically claiming the land with every step that you take. And Abram pitched his tents, and he came and he dwelt in the plains of Mamre, which is in Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Hebron, of course, is the place where ultimately he will bury his wife, Sarah. This is way down the line. And in the cave of Machpelah, which is, of course, another of the holy sites. So far, in this Torah portion, we read about Shechem, the holy city of Shechem, and the holy city of Hebron. And these are two holy cities. And you should know that today in Israel, these are two of the most hotly contested cities in the Promised Land. Every city that's mentioned in the Bible as a Jewish city is one of those contested cities. And it's not by accident. It's not like ironic. It's like, the irony. The specific cities that are mentioned as associated with Judaism are the ones that are contested. Golly, it's not so random. It's because they're in the Torah as Jewish cities. That's part of the reason why there is a lot of effort to try to kind of rewrite the script. Anyway, Shechem, which is today called Nablus by some, Shechem is a Jewish city. It's where Joseph, our patriarch Joseph, was buried. You should know, a few years ago, they desecrated Joseph's tomb. There was a riot, one of the intifadas, and they desecrated Joseph's tomb. Can you imagine Joseph, biblical Joseph, his tomb? It's very disheartening. Hebron, of course, is a very complicated city today as well. So a lot of challenges, a lot of safety concerns, etc. But nonetheless, this is the Torah's account. So Abram is told that this land is yours. Walk around, get to know it, do a test drive, and indeed, I will give it to your seed. Remember, this is before Abram has a child. He does not have a child. Doesn't he? At this point, probably despairs of having a child, and God is telling him, your children are going to be many, so many you can't even count on both levels. And they're going to inherit this land. So it's a tremendous blessing. Some say that God waited till Lot left to give him this promise, this blessing. Right? If you notice, the chronology of the story is Lot leaves, and then verse 14, and the Lord said to Abram, when? After Lot had parted from him. The Torah specifies. It could have just dropped this story and God said to Abram, raise your eyes, blah, blah, blah. No, it adds in, after Lot had parted from him, to tell us, no, the chronology here is important. it's not just that the Torah is telling us one story and then another story. Well, Abram and Lot went their separate ways, and then God said to Abram about the promise of the land and the children. He said that after Lot had left. And the commentaries say it's part of the reason. One of the reasons for this is because Lot was on some level a negative, somewhat of a negative influence. So God did not have that type of communication as long as Lot was around. And one could argue maybe also that God was telling Avram that the progeny that I promise you will not be through your nephew. I'm not telling you that your other relatives will start, their kids will be the ones that I'm talking about. No, after Lot leaves, God says to Avram, you are going to have kids. If Lot was still around, he might have thought, oh, he means Lot. That's my child, it's my adopted son. He says, no, this is going to be your own progeny. And that is that. I don't know that he formally adopted Lot, but he certainly looked after him for a little bit. And this is a different promise. Okay, let's check in. Any questions or comments on the reading? Nope, makes sense?
Yep.
Okay. Very cool. Good. So here's the deal. Tomorrow, I have another engagement that's going to take me all the way to 12:30, at least 12:30, maybe a few minutes later. So I'm like debating whether or not it makes sense to do a very late start DPP, or we just postpone DPP, no DPP tomorrow, and we do a little bit more today. And I'm leaning toward the second approach just because, you're going to be logging on late and it just throws everyone's schedule off kilter. So we have now another 15 minutes. Let's jump into reading 4. Let's see if we can do this today so that we can, officially just call off tomorrow. And that way there's no confusion or any, missing information. Okay, so let's jump into reading 4, Lech Lecha. The story continues. Now it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, the king of Shinar. Let me just tell you what's going on here. We're going to read about a regional war, maybe a world war at the time that occurred between 5 nations and 4 nations. The 5 kings against the 4 kings. So here we go. So it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, number 1, Arioch, the king of Eliezer, 2, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, 3, and Tidal, the king of Goyim. That's 4 kings. So they waged war. The 4 kings waged war with Bera, the king of Sodom, 1, Birsha, the king of Gomorrah, 2, Shinab, the king of Admah, 3, Shemeber, the king of Zeboim, which is 4, and the king of Bela, which is Tsar, 5. So the 4 kings went to war against the 5 kings. You would think the 5 kings would be stronger because, hey, 5 against 4, the 4 are shorthanded. If it's hockey, it's a man advantage, it's a king advantage, a nation advantage. Nonetheless, it doesn't always work like that in war. The 4 were actually very mighty. So the 4 kings instigated this war against the 5. So all these join in the valley of Siddim, which is the Dead Sea. So this war takes place in that area, in that part of the world. So for 12 years, they served Kedorlaomer. In other words, the 5 kings served the 4 kings for 12 years. And for 13 years, they rebelled. So this was a long term dispute. You hear about countries that are at war with each other for decades. This was one of those. You have 5 nations against 4 nations, or 4 against 5. And for decades, this one's on top and that one's rebelling and insurgencies and the whole deal. And in the 14th year, because they rebelled for 13, so in the 14th year, Kedorlaomer came and the kings who were with him, the 4 kings, and they smote the Rephaim in Ashrot Karnaim and the Zuzim in Ham, and the Ham, and the Amim in Shaveh Kiryatayim. So where these places are, I don't know exactly, but I do know that the 4 kings had crushed the 5 kings for 12 years. For 13 years, there was this rebellion of the 5 against the 4. And then in the 14th year, the 4 kings came and once again crushed the insurgency. Let's continue with verse number 6. And the Chorites in their mountain Seir until the plain of Paran, which is alongside the desert. So that's where these battles took place. And they returned and came to Ein Mishpat, which is Kadesh, and they smote the entire field of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who dwelt in Chatzatzon Tamar. And the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, the king of Tzvaim, the king of Bela, the 5 kings, these are the 5 kings, which is Tzoar, came forth, and they engaged them in battle in the valley of Sidon. So the 4 kings had crushed the 5. The 5 were now trying to, once again, overcome. And so they battled with Kedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and Tidal, the king of Goyim, and Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arich, the king of Eliezer, 4 kings against the 5. Yeah, it's everyone's names is being repeated multiple times. The point is, this was the battle. Now he says the valley of Sidon was composed of many clay pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell there, and the survivors fled to a mountain, which means that once again the 4 kings were crushing the 5. So the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah were part of the 5 king side, and they fell in those clay pits. In other words, the terrain was treacherous, and that was what was part of the downfall of the 5 kings. By the way, it's not the first time, or maybe it is the first time, but that wouldn't be the last time that war was won based on terrain, right? Many wars, world wars, not many, but many wars were won based on terrain, based on weather, terrain, etc. Let's continue. So the 4 kings took all the possession of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and they departed. So they conquered basically Sodom and Gomorrah. And they took captives. They took everybody. And they took Lot and all his possessions, the son of Abram's brother, and they departed. And he was living in Sodom, but Lot was living in Sodom. But when the 4 kings came in, Sodom was one of the 5 kings' nations, and they took people as POWs, prisoners of war. And one of the POWs was Lot and all of his stuff. They took them captive. And the fugitive came. Who's the fugitive? Og, the giant, came. Why is he called a fugitive? He escaped the war, or he escaped the flood. He held onto the side of the ark. I've told you this several times before, right? He was the guy that held onto the side of the ark. So he's called the fugitive, or because he ran away from this war, from the midst of the world war, he escaped. So the fugitive came and he told Abram the Hebrew, Avram Ivri. And he was living in the plain of Mamre, the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and the brother of Aner, who were Abram's confederates. So he told Abram about his nephew being kidnapped or taken POW. And Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, Lot. And he armed his trained men, those born in his house, 318. So he gathered 318 men with him, and he pursued them until dawn. Basically, he chased after the 4 kings with 318 men, not a big army. The truth is, our sages say that 318 is the numerology of Eliezer. The name Eliezer equals 318. So who is Eliezer? Abraham's trusted servant. So according to that opinion, it says he didn't even take 318 men. He took the man whose numerology numbered 318, Eliezer. So it was Abraham, according to this tradition, Abraham and one other guy. And these guys were bent on rescuing Abram's nephew, Lot. So, verse 15. And he divided himself against them at night, he and his servants, and smote them, and pursued them until Chova, which is to the left of Damascus. And he restored all the possessions. So basically, he beat back the 4 kings. The 5 kings couldn't, but Abraham and his trusty servant beat them back, drove them back. And restored all the possessions, and also Lot his brother. And his possessions he restored. So he rescued his nephew. And also the women and the people, all that were taken captive, he basically went in and got everyone freed. And the king of Sodom came out toward him. The king of Sodom was on the side that was losing before Abraham got into it. He was the 5 king side. They were the ones under the 4 kings. So the king of Sodom came out toward Abraham after his return from smiting Kedar Laomer, and the kings who were with him to the valley of Shva, which is the valley of the kings. So he came out to meet Abram, the hero, and Melchizedek, the king of Shalem. Melchizedek, by the way, is, according to our tradition, was Shem, the son of Noah, who was still alive then. Remember Shem, the oldest son of Noah, who was the righteous son? The Semites, the father of the Semites, yeah. Melchizedek, the king of Shalem. Where was Shalem? Salem. What was Shalem? Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim. Shalem is Yerushalayim. Complete city. Melchizedek, Shem, who was the king or the priest of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a holy place even then. He brought out bread and wine to Abram, and he was a priest. Melchizedek, was also a priest, not just the king, he was a priest to the Most High God. That indicates that Shem was a monotheist, right? It says the most High God, that means the one God above, God Almighty. So he was a monotheist. He was a big knacker, a big macher, a big important guy in Jerusalem. So he meets Avram, who had been his former disciple. I mentioned this last week, I think, or maybe earlier this week, how Abram had studied at the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. Abram had studied in the academy of Shem and his great-great-grandson, Aver. So Shem knew who Avram was. Avram had a mission from God to spread out monotheism and to teach it to the masses and all that stuff. That was his unique mission, Abraham's. But here Abram gets involved in this larger regional battle, regional war. Next thing you know, you have this reunion, Melchizedek and Avram, and he blessed him. Shem, the son of Noah, blessed Abram. I mean, when you know the characters, Melchizedek. Well, why is it called Melchizedek? You know what that means? Melchizedek. What's Melech? The word Melech. What does the word Melech mean?
King.
King. And what's Tzedek? Like Tzedek? What's Tzedek?
Righteous.
Righteous. Melchizedek means the righteous king. So who's the righteous king? It's not a name. It's righteous king. Who's the righteous king? Shem. Melchizedek, the king of Shalem. He was the righteous king. So he blessed him. He blessed Abram, and he said, "Blessed be Abram to the Most High God, who possesses heaven and earth." In other words, blessed are you to God, God who possesses heaven and earth. This is a monotheist. This is not an idolater. This is not an idolater. It's not a pagan king. This is a monotheistic king. This is Shem, who believes in monotheism, believes in one God, right? The Most High God. He blesses him. He says, Hashem bless you. Hashem who possesses heaven and earth. Hashem who runs everything, the whole show. This is a monotheist. Why wasn't Shem Avram? Why wasn't he? Because he was insular. He stayed. He had his own yeshiva. He did his own thing. He had his own beliefs. Avram was the first guy. I mentioned this previously. Avram was the first one to go viral with this. And the blessing continues. Shem continues. And blessed be the Most High. He gives Abraham a blessing, and then he blesses God. And blessed be the Most High God, who has delivered your adversaries into your hand. And he gave him a tithe from all. So different opinions of who gave who a tithe. The simple understanding is that Avram gave the king, the priest, gave Shem, Melchizedek, same guy, gave Shem, the son of Noah, gave him the tithe. Like later on in the temple, we would give the Kohen, the priest, the tithe. So he was a priest. He was a holy man. So he gave him a tithe from all that he had recaptured from the enemy. It's one way of seeing it. Let's look at Rashi and see what Rashi shares about this. Here we go. Rashi says, Abram gave Melchizedek a tithe from all that was his because, as I just mentioned, he was considered a priest. I know, it wasn't yet officially, he wasn't officially a Kohen, but Rashi says, Lefisha haya Kohen. That's the Hebrew side. Look at the Hebrew, Kohen. Kohen means priest. He was a priest. On some level, the priesthood begins from Aaron, the high priest, the brother of Moses. I know. But on some level, he was a priest. Before priests were priests, he was a priest. So Abram gives him a tenth, Meiser, gives him a tithe. Anyway, always good practice, right? Always good practice to give of what we get. All right, so that takes us through perfect time, and that takes us through tomorrow's reading as well. So we have no worries about tomorrow. We won't be DPPing tomorrow. We'll be back on Thursday. So what messages can we take from today's double readings from 3 and 4? Well, here are my thoughts. Number one, I'm just going to scroll back to 3 just to remind ourselves of it. So number one, it's important to recognize when the I'm still looking for that word, when the cracks first begin to appear, right? When the first signs of compromising the integrity of something, when it first begins, the first, fissures in something. It's important to see that and to know when to, step in and create some space, or step out and create some space in order for things to be healed. It's not good to keep on pushing. You got to know when to pull back. Or actually, before that, first of all, it's important to recognize where relationships are, whether it's parents and children, whether it's friends or neighbors or community. It's important to pick up on the clues. Number one. Number two, don't wait for the other one to take action. If something needs to be tweaked, you be the one to tweak it first. In the case of Abram, he felt the best tweak would be to create some space. I still love you, but I want to respect your space. You do things differently than I. So instead of us trying to force each other's ways down each other's throats, let's agree to disagree. You go your way, I'll go my way, but I'll always be around. I always care about you. So again, the message here is about the importance of proactively seeking to preserve our relationships and the idea of respect and creating distance. You're not always going to be able to dictate to the other person what they do and how they do things. It's important to allow for them to have the room to make their own choices and their own mistakes. After all, we made mistakes. Why can't we let someone else make mistakes? Because you want the best for them. Okay. Sometimes the best is to let them know that you'll always be there for them, but you're not going to do it for them. The next piece, the next lesson, I don't know if it's a lesson, the blessing of God to Abram about the land and about the children, likens Abraham's children to the dust of the earth, which might seem to be, number one, not accurate quantitatively, and also maybe a little disrespectful. Dust of the earth. On the contrary, the dust of the earth has the greatest treasures, the greatest power of sustaining life and growth, and treasures, literal treasures, metaphorical treasures. It's all in the earth. And that also reminds us through historically, even though historically Jews have been trampled on, at the end of the day, there's something special, a treasure, we call that Torah, Yiddishkeit, etc. And finally, in the last reading that we did, reading 4, it talked about the war, and it talked about Abram going into the battle that wasn't his war, but he entered it to rescue his nephew. In other words, if we want to come full circle in the story, Abram delivered on his promise. He told his nephew, wherever you go, I'll always be at your side. In other words, I'll always be there for you when you need me. In his moment of need, when Lot was taken as a prisoner of war, Abram was there to heroically fight for him and to rescue him. So that's that. Now, one more thing. Who was the one that told Abram about his nephew? So I told you it was the fugitive. And according to the commentaries, Og did so with an ulterior motive. As you might recall, Sarah, or Sarai at that point, her name hadn't been changed yet, was exceedingly beautiful. Well, that didn't escape the eyes of one jolly green giant named Og. Og had noticed the beauty of Sarah or Sarai, and he wanted to marry her, but she was married. So his ulterior motive was to send Abram into the fray, into the war. He would certainly be killed trying to rescue his nephew. Like, what are the odds that he would survive that? And then, being widowed, he would swoop in as only a giant can, lumber in, swoop in gracefully, and sweep her off her feet, and he would marry her, and they would live happily ever after. Well, it didn't work out that way for Og, because Abraham not only survived, but he conquered, rescued Lot, and he was the hero. You imagine, right? Imagine Og's dismay and frustration when Abram emerges victorious with that ticker tape parade. Is that how you say ticker tape? Is that right? Yeah.
Rabbi, Og is a very intriguing character, right? I mean, he just comes in and out here and there in weird circumstances.
Totally.
And he's never really explained.
Total floater. Yeah. He becomes a king later on. Moses kills him. The whole deal. Yeah. He's righteous. He's not righteous. He has good intentions, not good intentions. It's crazy. I mentioned this many times before. Moses later on, when he was battling Og, was afraid, because Og had this merit of this mitzvah of saving Lot's life, because he was the one that told Abram that his nephew's life was in danger. And Moses was afraid. Well, that's saving a life is a big merit, even though there was an ulterior motive. And the message is, even when we do a mitzvah for the wrong reasons, it's still a mitzvah. So at the end of the day, Og saved Lot's life because he told Abram about it. Abram might not have known. It's not like he tuned into like the CBS News, whatever, the broadcast. Not like he was watching a Twitter feed, like, oh, Lot's captured, SOS signals. He didn't know. How would he have known if not for Og? So Og, turns out Og saved Abram's life, Lot's life, for the wrong reasons, but the credit goes to him ultimately. And that tells us the power of a mitzvah, the power of a good deed. Even when we have not the purest of intentions, a good deed is a good deed. Let not our own selfishness get in the way of our performance of a mitzvah. We should never tell ourselves, well, if I can't do it purely, if I have an agenda, then I shouldn't do it. It taints the experience. Do it anyway, right? Go work on yourself another time. But a mitzvah comes, you feel proud about the mitzvah, do it anyway. Don't cut off the nose to spite the face, so to speak. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't say, well, if it can't be pure, then either all the way or none of the way. Do it impure. Do it. As Nike said, just do it. Just do the mitzvah, even if it's not perfect. Mark.
Yeah, two things. Where it says, I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth. And I know you mentioned this, but Rashi goes into a little bit more. He says, like dust is scattered throughout the world. But Rashi says here, but if there's not dust in the world, there are no trees or crops in the world. But then he goes further. And he says, but in the days of the Messiah, the Jewish people are compared to sand, which sets everyone's teeth on the edge. So will Israel annihilate and blunt the entire world? In other words, all those who antagonize him, that's understood here. As it says, and to him, in other words, to the Messiah, will be the blunting of the nations. I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. So dust is a little softer than sand. Sand is a little bit more coarse.
Yeah.
Right. And so the idea is that in the Messianic era, and there's different ways to read that. You can read that as a harsh thing or as a more of a kind of a realistic thing, that when the truth emerges, everyone will be like, oh, okay, well, there you go. I guess I'll just adjust and modify some things. And that's a correction. That's like a cutting, if you will, a correction of the way things are. Like, oh, I thought this was going to happen. All right, that happened, right? Or I thought this was the right way to do it. All right, that's the right way to do it. It's a correction. Good. I like it. All right, so let's close it out here for today. Let's close it out here for today. We'll pick it up in 2 days.
Can I add one more thing?
Sure.
This is not in commentary, but it occurs to me, where it says, Abraham says, if you go to the left, I'll go to the right, whatever. He says, Rashi says, wherever you may dwell, I will not distance myself from you, but I will stand for you as a protector and a helper. Right. And what I thought about was during the Holocaust, the Jews were told to the left, which was to the gas chamber, as I understand it, and to the right, which was to slave work, but not the gas chamber. But in other words, from that context, it says, wherever you may dwell, I will not distance myself from you. In other words, even those who died will not be distanced from those who are living. That's what occurred to me. And I will stand as your protector.
Interesting.
And a helper.
Interesting.
So that just occurred to me.
I like that. In other words, that even those who did not survive have a relationship.
The living ones, those who lived will protect them. Yeah.
Right. Could work both ways. Right? Either from on high or from below to live out the legacy and the memories. Beautiful, beautiful, very touching. I like that. The Medrash of Mark's Medrash. It's beautiful. Donna. You got something?
I'm fine. Just gonna say goodbye.
Got it. No, I saw the mic open, so I thought maybe you had. All right, great to see everybody. Joy, Olia, Donna, Sarah, Mark. Great to study together. Don't forget, tomorrow, no DPP at 12, but tomorrow night, an incredible brand new Torah studies class, 7:30 in person at Chabad or on Zoom. Join us tomorrow night, 7:30. Thursday night, Curious Tales of the Talmud. And next week, wow, do we have a week? Action-packed week. Hot topics Monday night. Some of the most captivating modern questions, technology, medicine, gender, the ecology, the environment, so many modern questions through a Jewish halachic lens. That's Monday night. 6-week course begins. Hot topics. And Tuesday night, we have the incredible event with Judge Ruchi or Judge Rachel Fryer, the first Orthodox Jewish woman to be appointed in a public position in the United States, a public, an official role in government. She's an incredibly strong person, incredibly just challenging a lot of conceptions about orthodoxy and women within orthodoxy. This is going to be an incredible event. You don't want to miss it. Tuesday night, 8 p.m. IntownJewishAcademy.org. Join us. All right, that's it for right now, and we'll see you guys soon. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure. See you guys soon.